Let me start with an uncomfortable question. Why are there people who earn good money yet live as if they're always one step away from financial collapse? A paycheck arrives and then disappears. I once met someone earning less than his coworkers, yet he slept better than all of them. Same city, same job, completely different structure. Bills make them anxious. A small unexpected expense throws everything off. If you think the difference is intelligence, luck, or opportunity, you're wrong. The truth is harsher than that. The difference doesn't show up in bank accounts. It shows up in small decisions repeated every day, so quietly that most people never notice them happening. And in this video, I'm not going to talk about how to make more money. I'm going to show you why money disappears from people's lives in the first place, and why the same habits everyone considers normal are exactly what prevent financial security from ever forming. If you stay until the end, you'll start seeing your daily decisions differently, and once you see this gap clearly, you won't be able to ignore it again. Here's something that makes people uncomfortable. Rich people don't have better taste, they have better filters. They don't ask themselves if they want something, they ask themselves what it costs beyond money. They think in layers. Time, opportunity, stress, freedom, and future options all factor into every decision. Poor people, not because they are unintelligent, but because they are overwhelmed, make decisions in a single layer. Can I afford this right now? Does this make me feel better today? Does this help me keep up? And that single layer thinking is devastating over time. Ask yourself honestly, how many purchases do you make without remembering why you made them? How many things in your life once felt exciting and now feel invisible, yet still cost you money, maintenance, or mental energy? How many decisions felt harmless in the moment but quietly followed you for years? Most financial damage is not caused by emergencies, it is caused by normalization. Spending becomes routine, payments become background noise, upgrades become expected. What once felt like a luxury slowly turns into a necessity, and then into a burden. And because this transition happens gradually, almost no one notices it happening. Wealthy people notice. They are deeply aware of lifestyle creep, even when their income increases, especially when it increases. They understand that every raise, every bonus, every windfall comes with a hidden danger. The danger is not losing the money. The danger is restructuring your life around it. Once your lifestyle expands, it rarely contracts without pain. So wealthy people are cautious. They don't let every increase in income rewrite their standards of living. Poor people do the opposite. The moment money increases, spending increases. New comforts are added, new expectations are set. And suddenly, the old income feels impossible to live on, even though they once did exactly that. This is how people end up earning more than ever while feeling poorer than ever. Let me ask you a question that might change the way you see money forever. If your income doubled tomorrow, would your life change dramatically within 6 months, or would it look mostly the same? Your answer reveals everything. Wealthy people could lose half their income and still breathe. Poor people gain income and still feel suffocated. The difference is not money, it is structure. Another truth most people don't like to admit is that spending is rarely logical. It is emotional. People spend to soothe stress, to reward effort, to escape boredom, to feel progress, to avoid discomfort, and to signal success. Money becomes a coping mechanism. And when money is used to manage emotions instead of build security, it disappears quickly and leaves nothing behind. Wealthy people are not emotionless. They simply separate emotion from money. They do not reward themselves with financial sabotage. They understand that the brain is wired for immediate comfort, not long-term stability. So instead of trusting their impulses, they design systems to protect themselves from those impulses. Ask yourself this. When you feel tired, stressed, or overwhelmed, does your spending increase? Do small purchases suddenly feel justified? Do you find yourself saying things like, "I deserve this," or "I'll make it back later"? If so, you're not alone, but you are also not safe. One of the greatest misunderstandings about wealthy people is that they are lucky or disciplined by nature. They aren't. They are disciplined by design. They assume their instincts are flawed. They assume temptation will win if given the chance, so they remove the chance. Poor people rely on willpower. Wealthy people rely on systems, and willpower always loses eventually. If willpower worked, wouldn't it have by now? Another major difference between rich and poor is how they see time. Poor people experience time as urgent. Everything feels like now. The desire, the stress, the pressure to act. Rich people experience time as expansive. They think in decades. They see today as a small part of a much longer story. That perspective changes everything. When you think short-term, spending feels harmless. When you think long-term, spending feels expensive. Every dollar spent today is not just gone, it is gone forever from the future it could have created. That is a hard truth to accept because the loss is invisible. You don't see the retirement that never happened. You don't see the freedom you never reached. You only see the momentary pleasure you gained. And humans are terrible at valuing invisible losses. Rich people train themselves to see the invisible. They see the vacation as postponed freedom. They see the impulse buy as delayed security. They see the upgrade as reduced flexibility. Poor people see enjoyment, comfort, relief. Different interpretations, same action, completely different outcomes. Let me ask you something else. When was the last time you felt truly financially relaxed? Not excited, not entertained, relaxed. The kind of calm that comes from knowing nothing urgent is looming, nothing is chasing you, nothing unexpected will derail your life. If that feeling is rare, it's not because you haven't earned enough. It's because too much of what you earn is already promised away. Wealthy people hate promises that trap future income. They value flexibility above almost everything else. Flexibility means options. Options means power means peace. Poor people trade flexibility for comfort without realizing the exchange they are making. They lock themselves into decisions that assume everything will always go right, and when what life always does, they are left exposed. Another uncomfortable truth is this: normal behavior produces average results, and average results in today's world mean stress, dependency, and financial vulnerability. Wealthy people do not aim to be normal, they aim to be secure, and security requires being different. If everyone around you is doing something, that should not reassure you, it should make you cautious. Why does following the crowd feel safe even when the crowd is struggling? Because belonging feels better than thinking. Wealthy people are willing to feel different, willing to feel behind, willing to feel misunderstood. They know these feelings are temporary. Financial regret lasts much longer. Poor people avoid discomfort now and unknowingly commit to it later. Every financial life is shaped by pain. The only choice is timing. Do you choose the mild discomfort of restraint now or the crushing discomfort of regret later? There is one final difference in mindset that ties everything together. Wealthy people see money as something that must be directed with intention. Poor people see money as something that simply happens to them. One group command it, the other reacts to it. If you don't tell your money where to go, it will go wherever your emotions point it, and emotions are terrible financial planners. So ask yourself this and answer honestly. Are your financial decisions driven by intention or reaction, by clarity or impulse, by long-term vision or short-term relief? Because the real gap between rich and poor does not live in bank accounts. It lives in habits repeated quietly every day. It lives in purchases no one remembers. It lives in standards no one questions. It lives in the courage to ignore what everyone else obeys. And once you see that gap clearly, you can never unsee it.
The addiction to upgrading. There's a quiet addiction shaping modern financial lives, and most people don't even recognize it as one. It doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't feel reckless. In fact, it's praised, encouraged, and marketed as progress. It's the addiction to upgrading. Newer, faster, better, slightly improved versions of things that were already working just fine. And while it feels harmless in the moment, this addiction has destroyed more long-term wealth than almost any obvious financial mistake. Most people don't wake up intending to sabotage their future. They simply fall into a rhythm where replacement feels normal, Waiting feels outdated, and keeping something too long feels like falling behind. Phones are replaced not because they're broken, but because a new model exists. Cars are traded not because they're unreliable, but because they're no longer exciting. Homes are upgraded not because they're inadequate, but because someone else has something bigger. And slowly, without realizing it, people begin financing a moving target that never stops running. Let me ask you something that might stop you mid-thought. How often do you replace things that still work, not because they failed, but because they no longer feel new? How many upgrades in your life were driven by need, and how many were driven by restlessness? Wealthy people understand something most people never pause to consider. New is expensive, not just in money, but in opportunity. Every upgrade carries a hidden tax, the tax of lost compounding, and that tax is paid forever. Poor people tend to think of upgrades as isolated events. Just this phone, just this car, just this couch, just this appliance. But wealthy people see patterns. They see behavior repeating. They know that anything done once will likely be done again. And when an expensive behavior becomes habitual, it becomes catastrophic. The problem is not the single upgrade. The problem is the cycle. A person upgrades their phone every year or two. Each time the cost feels manageable. It's broken into payments. It's framed as necessary. It's justified by productivity, convenience, or enjoyment. But what happens over 20 or 30 years? How many thousands of dollars were spent chasing marginal improvements that added almost nothing to real quality of life? And more importantly, how much wealth was never built because those dollars were consumed instead of invested? Wealthy people don't chase marginal improvements. They chase durability. They ask different questions. Does this still work? Does this still serve its purpose? Does replacing this actually improve my life in a meaningful way? Or does it simply satisfy boredom? Poor people rarely ask these questions because they're conditioned to associate progress with replacement. If something isn't new, it feels outdated. If it's outdated, it feels like failure. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Progress does not require constant replacement. In fact, constant replacement is often the enemy of progress. Let's talk about the emotional side of upgrading, because this is where most people lose clarity. Upgrading gives a temporary high, a sense of movement, a feeling of advancement. It feels like doing something productive even when it isn't. That feeling is addictive. The brain loves novelty. Marketing exploits it relentlessly. And because the pleasure is immediate while the cost is delayed, people underestimate the damage. Ask yourself this. When you upgraded something recently, how long did the excitement last? Days? Weeks? And how long did the payment last? Months? Years? This imbalance is at the heart of the problem. Wealthy people are deeply suspicious of anything that offers short-term excitement with long-term obligation. They know the thrill will fade, but the cost will remain. Poor people focus on the thrill and trust themselves to handle the cost later. Later always arrives faster than expected. Another thing wealthy people understand is that upgrading often masks dissatisfaction elsewhere. People upgrade their possessions when they feel stuck in their lives. When growth slows, spending increases. When meaning is lacking, consumption fills the gap. And instead of addressing the real issue, people distract themselves with improvement theater. New things, new setups, new versions, the illusion of change without the substance of it. Wealthy people are brutally honest with themselves about this. They don't use money to numb discomfort. They use discomfort as information. Let me ask you a difficult question. When was the last time you upgraded something because you were bored, frustrated, or restless, not because it was necessary? And if you're honest, how often does that happen? The addiction to upgrading is reinforced by comparison. Social media has turned everyone into a walking advertisement. You don't just see products anymore. You see lifestyles. You see curated improvements. New cars in driveways, new kitchens, new offices, new devices. And without realizing it, your baseline shifts. What once felt enough now feels insufficient. Wealthy people are aware of this psychological trap. They limit exposure. They don't constantly consume images of what others have. They know envy is expensive. Poor people scroll endlessly and wonder why contentment feels harder every year. Another subtle danger of upgrading is that it resets expectations. Once you upgrade, going back feels painful. Comfort escalates, tolerance shifts, and suddenly what was once a luxury becomes the new minimum. This is how people trap themselves into higher and higher fixed costs without noticing the walls closing in. Wealthy people resist this escalation aggressively. They don't let convenience rewrite their standards unless it creates lasting value. Poor people slowly increase their cost of living until there's no room left to breathe. Ask yourself this: if your income stopped increasing tomorrow, could your lifestyle stay exactly the same for the next 10 years? Or does it depend on constant growth just to stand still? That question reveals whether upgrades are serving you or enslaving you. There's another layer to this addiction that most people never consider. Upgrading trains impatience. It conditions the mind to expect immediate improvement. Something feels slightly inconvenient, so it's replaced. Something feels mildly slow, so it's upgraded. Over time, tolerance for inconvenience disappears, and with it, the ability to delay gratification. Wealth requires patience. Compounding requires patience. Investing requires patience. People addicted to upgrading struggle with patience because they've trained themselves to eliminate friction instantly. And when it comes time to wait for returns, to stay the course, to endure boredom, they can't. Wealthy people deliberately practice patience in small ways. They keep things longer than necessary. They resist replacements. They tolerate imperfection. Not because they enjoy discomfort, but because they understand the skill they're training, the ability to wait. Ask yourself honestly, when something feels slightly outdated, do you immediately think about replacing it, or do you ask whether the discomfort is actually harming you? Here's a powerful truth. Most upgrades improve appearance more than function. They make life look better long before they make it better. Wealthy people care very little about appearance. They care about leverage. They know that an older device that works is better than a newer device that delays financial freedom. They know that the real upgrade is not what sits in your hand or driveway, but what sits quietly growing in your accounts. Poor people often say they'll focus on investing once their lifestyle is set, but lifestyle is never set. There is always another upgrade waiting, another improvement promised, another version released, and if you chase that horizon, you will never arrive. Wealthy people decide early what enough looks like, and once enough is defined, upgrades lose their power. So let me ask you this: what does enough look like for you? Not in theory, but in practice. How much comfort is truly necessary? How much performance is truly useful? How much novelty is actually improving your life? If you can't answer those questions, upgrades will answer them for you, and they will answer expensively. Another reason upgrading is so dangerous is because it's rarely framed as spending. It's framed as optimization, productivity, efficiency, self-care. And while some upgrades genuinely add value, most are just expensive ways to feel proactive. Wealthy people separate real improvement from cosmetic change. They upgrade skills before tools, systems before surfaces, processes before possessions. Poor people do the opposite. They buy better tools hoping it will fix habits that never change. Ask yourself this: has upgrading something ever solved a problem that discipline would have solved for free?
The wealthy know that mastery beats machinery, consistency beats convenience, and ownership beats novelty. There is also a generational cost to upgrading. Children raised in constant replacement environments learn that nothing is meant to last, that satisfaction is temporary, that boredom is a problem to be solved with consumption. Wealthy families teach the opposite. They normalize longevity, maintenance, care, respect for resources. Those lessons compound across generations. Here's the harsh reality: the addiction to upgrading doesn't just drain money, it erodes gratitude. When everything is always improved, nothing is appreciated. And when nothing is appreciated, contentment disappears. No amount of upgrading fixes that. Wealthy people cultivate satisfaction by limiting upgrades. They let appreciation catch up to ownership.
Poor people upgrade faster than appreciation can form, and they spend their lives chasing a feeling that never stabilizes. So, ask yourself one final question as you sit with this chapter. If you stopped upgrading for the next 5 years, what would actually break? What would truly fail? And what would simply feel uncomfortable because you've been trained to expect more? The answers may surprise you, because the real upgrade is not the next version of what you own. It's the version of you that no longer needs it, convenience that bleeds you slowly. There is a cost most people pay every single day without ever seeing it clearly, and it doesn't arrive as a bill large enough to scare them, doesn't announce itself as danger, doesn't feel reckless or irresponsible, and that is exactly why it works so well at keeping people broke. Because this cost disguises itself as convenience, as efficiency, as saving time, as self-care, as a small reward for being tired. And people accept it gladly, repeatedly, and unconsciously, never realizing that convenience is one of the most expensive habits a person can develop when it becomes automatic. Because convenience trains you to trade money for comfort without thinking, and when that trade becomes invisible, wealth never has a chance to form. Most people don't realize how often they choose convenience because it feels reasonable in isolation. The delivery fee is small, the rush charge is minor, the premium option is just a few dollars more, and each decision feels harmless on its own. But wealth is not lost in isolation. It is lost in patterns, and convenience is a pattern that repeats daily, sometimes multiple times a day, quietly siphoning money away before it ever has the chance to do anything meaningful for your future. Ask yourself honestly, how many times in the past week did you pay extra simply to avoid waiting, walking, cooking, planning, or being mildly uncomfortable? And how many of those decisions did you even remember making? That's the danger, because when spending becomes frictionless, thinking disappears, and when thinking disappears, discipline goes with it. Wealthy people are deeply suspicious of convenience, not because they hate comfort, but because they understand what it replaces, which is intentionality, and intentionality is the foundation of wealth. They know that every time you pay to avoid effort, you weaken your tolerance for effort, and effort is required for everything that compounds: investing, building skills, growing businesses, maintaining health, and managing money itself. Poor people unknowingly train themselves in the opposite direction. They optimize their lives to remove friction everywhere, and in doing so, they remove the very resistance that builds strength, patience, and long-term thinking. Convenience doesn't just cost money, it reshapes behavior. It makes waiting feel intolerable, planning feel burdensome, and simplicity feel like deprivation. And once your nervous system adapts to immediate gratification, anything that requires delay starts to feel like punishment. This is why people who rely heavily on convenience struggle so much with saving and investing, because saving is inconvenient, investing is boring, and waiting for results feels uncomfortable when your life has been engineered around instant relief. Wealthy people intentionally practice inconvenience in small ways. They wait, they batch tasks, they cook, they repair, they reuse, not because they can't afford not to, but because they understand that tolerance for inconvenience is a skill, and like any skill, it must be exercised or it disappears. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you chose the slower option even though the faster one was available? And how did it feel? Did it feel wrong, outdated, inefficient, or did it simply feel unfamiliar because you're no longer used to waiting? Most people confuse unfamiliar discomfort with harm, and convenience exploits that confusion perfectly. Another hidden cost of convenience is that it fragments awareness. When everything is outsourced, delivered, automated, and expedited, people lose connection to how things actually work, how money flows, how time is spent, and how effort turns into outcomes. And when that connection is lost, money becomes abstract, something that disappears digitally rather than something exchanged intentionally. Wealthy people stay connected to the mechanics of their lives. They know where their money goes, they know what they're paying for, and they know when something is genuinely worth it versus when it's simply easier. Poor people often outsource not just tasks, but responsibility. And once responsibility is outsourced, control disappears with it. Ask yourself this: are you paying for convenience because it truly frees you to do something valuable, or because it saves you from doing something uncomfortable? That distinction matters more than most people realize. Convenience that frees time for high-value work can be an investment, but convenience used to avoid effort is a liability, and most people never separate the two. They tell themselves they're busy, overwhelmed, stretched thin, yet when you look closely, much of their money is spent reducing friction rather than increasing leverage. They pay to avoid cooking, but don't invest in skills that increase earning power. They pay to save minutes, but don't invest to save years. And this inversion slowly traps them in a life where everything feels rushed, expensive, and fragile. Wealthy people reverse this equation. They are willing to spend time to save money early so they can later spend money to save time intentionally, and that sequencing is critical. Poor people spend money to save time before they've built anything worth protecting, and as a result, they never escape the cycle. Another question worth asking is this: if convenience were removed from your life tomorrow, what would actually collapse, and what would merely feel uncomfortable because you've grown dependent on ease? Most people are shocked by the answer because very little truly breaks, but discomfort feels so unfamiliar that it's mistaken for danger. Convenience also distorts value perception. When everything is available instantly, effort feels overpriced, and people begin to resent paying for things that require patience, even when patience would benefit them most. This is why convenience-heavy lifestyles often come with constant low-level dissatisfaction. Nothing feels earned, nothing feels lasting, and nothing feels stable. Wealthy people understand that stability comes from systems, not shortcuts, and shortcuts almost always carry hidden costs. Over decades, the person who consistently chooses convenience spends tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands more than the person who doesn't, not in dramatic purchases, but in invisible leaks, fees, markups, premiums, and rushed decisions. And because those costs are fragmented, they're never confronted emotionally, never felt fully, and never corrected. Ask yourself this: if every convenience spending you made in the past year were presented to you as a single number, would it shock you, or would you shrug and say that's just the cost of modern life? Wealthy people question what others accept, and that questioning is what saves them. Convenience trains people to believe their time is too valuable for small effort, but rarely asks whether their time is actually being used for anything valuable instead. And this is where the self-deception lives. If the time saved isn't invested into growth, rest, or creation, then convenience didn't buy freedom, it bought avoidance. And avoidance compounds just as aggressively as discipline does, only in the opposite direction. Over time, people who constantly choose convenience lose confidence in their ability to handle inconvenience, and that loss of confidence bleeds into every area of life: finances, health, relationships, resilience, and decision-making, because the moment something feels hard, the instinct is to pay it away rather than work through it. Wealthy people are comfortable with friction. They expect it, plan for it, and build around it, and because of that, they are not shaken by it. Poor people are surprised by friction and financially wounded by it. So, the question is not whether convenience is bad, but whether it is conscious, intentional, and earned, or automatic, emotional, and habitual, because one builds leverage and the other erodes it quietly. Ask yourself one final question as you sit with this. If you stopped convenience spending for the last year and redirected that money into long-term growth, how different would your future look in 10, 20, or 30 years? And would the mild discomfort you'd feel today be worth the freedom you'd feel later? Because convenience feels small, but its consequences are anything but.
The trap of monthly commitments. There is a silent structure holding millions of people exactly where they are financially. And it doesn't look like poverty. It looks like normal life because it hides behind monthly commitments that feel manageable, reasonable, and even responsible. Yet when stacked together, they form a cage that quietly controls every future decision a person makes. Because once your income is pre-allocated, your choices disappear.
and most people never realize how much of their life they've already spent before the month even begins. Monthly commitments feel safe because they are predictable, but predictability without flexibility is not security, it's dependence. And the moment income hiccups, stress rushes in, not because the person failed, but because their margin was already gone. Ask yourself this: how much of your income is already promised before you even see it? And how many of those promises were made casually, without long-term thought, simply because the monthly amount seemed small enough at the time? That is how the trap works, not through massive decisions, but through dozens of small agreements that each say just this much, until there is nothing left to move. Wealthy people are intensely aware of fixed obligations, not because they fear spending, but because they value optionality above almost everything else, and fixed commitments reduce optionality relentlessly. Every recurring bill is a claim on your future, a vote that says no matter what happens, this must be paid first. And when too many votes are cast, your future stops being flexible and starts being fragile. Poor people often mistake commitments for stability, believing that having everything set up on autopay means life is organized. But autopay doesn't create organization, it creates blindness, and blindness is expensive. When money leaves automatically, pain is delayed, and when pain is delayed, behavior doesn't change. Wealthy people want to feel the friction of spending. They want awareness. They want to notice when costs rise, because awareness is the only thing that allows control. Ask yourself this: if every monthly commitment you have suddenly doubled tomorrow, how many would you cancel immediately? And why weren't they optional to begin with? Most people discover too late that what they thought were choices were actually obligations dressed up as convenience. Another dangerous illusion of monthly commitments is that they make expensive things feel cheap. When something is broken into payments, the brain ignores the total cost and focuses only on survivability. And survivability is a low standard for decision-making. Just because you can survive a payment doesn't mean it deserves a permanent place in your life. Wealthy people think in totals, not installments, and they ask whether the full cost is worth locking in a piece of their future. Poor people focus on whether the payment fits right now, and right now is always temporary. Over time, monthly commitments stack like sediment, each layer thin, but together heavy enough to suffocate progress. And once income is fully allocated, saving becomes something that must be squeezed in, begged for, or postponed, rather than treated as a priority. Ask yourself this: do you save what's left after your commitments, or do you commit only after saving? That single order determines whether wealth is possible or accidental. Monthly commitments also create psychological pressure. They reduce risk tolerance because when too much is owed, fear increases. People become afraid to change jobs, start businesses, take time off, or say no, not because they lack ambition, but because they lack room to breathe. Wealthy people design their lives so that fear has little leverage over them. They keep their fixed costs low so their confidence can stay high, while poor people unknowingly sell their courage one monthly bill at a time. Another subtle cost of recurring commitments is decision fatigue. When so much of your life is locked in, mental energy is spent managing obligations instead of creating opportunity, and opportunity requires mental space. Wealthy people protect their attention fiercely. They know that cluttered finances create cluttered thinking, and cluttered thinking leads to reactive decisions. Poor people often feel constantly tired, not because they work harder, but because their lives are overcommitted. Ask yourself this: how many of your monthly expenses still genuinely improve your life, and how many simply exist because canceling them feels annoying or uncomfortable? That reluctance is another form of captivity. Monthly commitments also teach people to underestimate risk. They assume tomorrow will look like today, that income will remain stable, health will cooperate, and life will behave. But life rarely does, and when it doesn't, fixed costs don't adapt, they demand. Wealthy people assume disruption is inevitable, so they build slack into their systems, while poor people assume stability and are shocked when it breaks. There is also a moral trap hidden in monthly commitments. People justify them by saying they're locked in, as if past decisions excuse future suffering. But past decisions don't pay future bills, only current flexibility does. Wealthy people are ruthless about eliminating obligations that no longer serve them. They renegotiate, downgrade, cancel, sell, or walk away because they understand that loyalty to a bad commitment is not virtue, it's inertia. Poor people stay loyal to obligations long after they stop making sense because admitting the mistake feels worse than continuing it. Ask yourself this: if you were starting your life from scratch today, which of your monthly commitments would you actively choose again, and which would you avoid entirely? That question reveals how much of your life is driven by momentum rather than intention. Over decades, the difference between someone with low fixed costs and someone with high fixed costs is not comfort, it's freedom. The person with fewer obligations can recover faster, adapt quicker, invest more, and sleep better, while the person with many obligations is constantly negotiating survival. Wealthy people understand that freedom is not about having more, it's about owing less, and that every recurring payment competes directly with their future self for resources. Poor people are rarely reckless, they're overcommitted, and that overcommitment turns even good income into stress. So ask yourself one final question as this settles in. If you removed just 3 unnecessary monthly commitments from your life and redirected that money into long-term growth, how differently would you feel about money a year from now? And how differently might you move through the world knowing that fewer things own you? Because the trap of monthly commitments is not that they cost too much individually, but that together they quietly decide your future without ever asking your permission. Entertainment as escapism. There is a kind of spending that rarely gets questioned because it feels deserved, harmless, and even necessary. Yet over time, it quietly drains ambition, clarity, and wealth, and that is entertainment used as escape rather than enjoyment. Because when people feel overwhelmed, dissatisfied, or stuck, they don't usually stop to ask what's wrong. They look for something to distract them from the feeling. And entertainment offers an immediate, socially approved solution that numbs discomfort without solving its cause. Most people don't realize how often they reach for entertainment, not because they want joy, but because they want relief. Relief from stress, relief from boredom, the anxiety of an uncertain future. And while the cost of any single movie, subscription, night out, or impulse trip feels small, the habit of escape compounds just like any other habit, except it compounds in avoidance rather than growth. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you consume entertainment to fill silence, to avoid thinking, or to forget about something you know you should be addressing, and how many of those moments turn into patterns you barely notice anymore? Wealthy people enjoy entertainment, but they are wary of escapism, because escapism steals time, focus, and energy from the very things that could change their circumstances. And they know that if entertainment becomes the default response to discomfort, progress stalls. Poor people often structure their lives around entertainment as a release valve, telling themselves they just need to make it to the weekend, the vacation, the next show, the next event. And that framing quietly turns life into something to endure rather than build. Another danger of entertainment as escapism is that it creates the illusion of a full life without the substance of one. People feel busy, stimulated, and occupied, yet nothing meaningful accumulates. No skills deepen, no assets grow, no stability forms, and years pass without visible change. Wealthy people are extremely conscious of how their downtime is used. They understand that rest is necessary, but escape is optional, and they draw a clear line between the two. Rest restores energy so you can re-engage with life, while escape delays engagement indefinitely. Ask yourself this: when you finish a long stretch of entertainment, do you feel refreshed and motivated, or dull, behind, and slightly anxious about the time you just lost? That feeling is information, and most people ignore it. Entertainment also trains the brain to expect stimulation on demand, which makes real-world effort feel slow, frustrating, and unrewarding in comparison. And when effort feels unrewarding, people avoid it.
and when effort is avoided, growth stops. Wealthy people protect their tolerance for boredom because boredom is often the doorway to creativity, planning, and long-term thinking, while poor people anesthetize boredom instantly and never discover what might have emerged on the other side of it. Another uncomfortable truth is that entertainment is often used to compensate for lack of control. When people feel powerless in their work, finances, or future, entertainment becomes the one.
Subscriptions, events, travel, dining, and impulse experiences often rival or exceed what people invest in their future, and that imbalance reveals priorities more clearly than any stated goal. Wealthy people align spending with outcomes. They don't eliminate joy, but they refuse to let joy undermine tomorrow, while poor people often protect entertainment spending even when everything else is strained, because taking it away feels like taking away hope. Yet hope built on escape is fragile. It disappears the moment the distraction ends. Another question worth asking is this: if you redirected just a portion of your entertainment budget into building skills, assets, or security, how different would your life feel a year from now? And would that change reduce your need to escape in the first place? Entertainment as escapism also dulls urgency. When people are constantly distracted, the pain that should motivate change is softened, and without pain, action is postponed indefinitely. Wealthy people don't numb discomfort prematurely, they let it guide adjustment, while poor people often medicate discomfort with consumption and then wonder why nothing changes. Over decades, the difference is stark. One group builds lives they don't need to escape from. The other builds routines they must escape repeatedly, and that cycle is expensive, emotionally, mentally, and financially. Ask yourself one final question as this sinks in. If you were forced to design your life 10 years from now in detail, including how you live, work, and feel, what choices today would suddenly feel irresponsible, and what changes would you make immediately if you truly believed that future version of you mattered as much as the present one? Because long-term thinking is not about predicting the future perfectly. It's about respecting it enough to prepare, and the people who do are rarely surprised by where they end up.
The quiet architecture of wealth. When you step back and look at all 6 chapters together, a single pattern emerges, quiet but undeniable, and it's this: wealth is not built through dramatic moments, lucky breaks, or sudden windfalls, but through a consistent refusal to participate in behaviors that silently drain the future in exchange for temporary comfort. Each chapter revealed a different doorway through which money leaks out of people's lives, yet all of them lead to the same place, a life where effort feels constant, but progress feels absent. New cars, oversized houses, status purchases, debt-fueled consumption, obedience to other people's opinions, and the absence of long-term thinking are not separate mistakes. They are expressions of the same mindset, a mindset that prioritizes now over later, appearance over substance, relief over leverage. Wealthy people do not avoid these things because they are naturally disciplined or morally superior. They avoid them because they see the full chain of consequences. They understand that every dollar has a future attached to it, and once you spend it, you choose that future permanently. Poor people, by contrast, are often trapped in decision-making environments that reward immediacy and punish patience, and over time this trains them to see money as something that passes through their hands rather than something that can be directed with intent. Each chapter exposed how society normalizes wealth-destroying choices, how advertising, peer pressure, easy credit, and cultural expectations quietly push people toward decisions that feel reasonable in isolation, but devastating in aggregate. Ask yourself this: if each of these behaviors is so common, so socially accepted, so rarely questioned, how many people do you know who are truly financially free? And what does that tell you about the path most people are following? The truth is uncomfortable but simple. Most people are not failing because they lack opportunity. They are failing because they are following a script that was never designed to produce wealth, only consumption.
These 6 chapters together are not about deprivation, they are about alignment, aligning spending with values, aligning decisions with the future, aligning identity with substance rather than image. When you stop buying new cars, you are not just saving money, you are rejecting depreciation. When you buy less house, you are not settling, you are reclaiming cash flow. When you refuse status symbols, you are not missing out, you are opting out of an expensive illusion. When you eliminate debt, you are not limiting yourself, you are removing a tax on your future. When you stop caring about other people's opinions, you are not isolating yourself, you are freeing your decision-making. And when you think long-term, truly long-term, you stop asking what something costs today and start asking what it costs forever. Each of these choices compounds into the next, reinforcing a lifestyle where money becomes a tool rather than a source of anxiety, where options expand instead of contract, where time begins to work for you instead of against you. Ask yourself one final question. If someone watched your financial choices for a year without hearing your intentions, what story would they assume you were telling about your future? Because intention without behavior is fantasy, and behavior repeated long enough becomes destiny. The people who win financially are rarely the loudest, flashiest, or most admired in the moment. They are the ones quietly making unremarkable choices that add up to remarkable outcomes. Wealth is not loud, it is patient. It is built in silence, protected by indifference to judgment, and sustained by respect for time. When all 6 chapters are understood together, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Becoming wealthy is less about what you start doing and far more about what you permanently stop doing.
The quiet architecture of wealth. When you step back and look at all 6 chapters together, a single pattern emerges, quiet but undeniable, and it's this. Wealth is not built through dramatic moments, lucky breaks, or sudden windfalls, but through a consistent refusal to participate in behaviors that silently drain the future in exchange for temporary comfort. Each chapter revealed a different doorway through which money leaks out of people's lives, yet all of them lead to the same place, a life where effort feels constant, but progress feels absent. New cars, oversized houses, status purchases, debt-fueled consumption, obedience to other people's opinions, and the absence of long-term thinking are not separate mistakes. They are expressions of the same mindset, a mindset that prioritizes now over later, appearance over substance, relief over leverage. Wealthy people do not avoid these things because they are naturally disciplined or morally superior. They avoid them because they see the full chain of consequences. They understand that every dollar has a future attached to it, and once you spend it, you choose that future permanently. Poor people, by contrast, are often trapped in decision-making environments that reward immediacy and punish patience, and over time this trains them to see money as something that passes through their hands rather than something that can be directed with intent. Each chapter exposed how society normalizes wealth-destroying choices, how advertising, peer pressure, easy credit, and cultural expectations quietly push people toward decisions that feel reasonable in isolation, but devastating in aggregate. Ask yourself this: if each of these behaviors is so common, so socially accepted, so rarely questioned, how many people do you know who are truly financially free? And what does that tell you about the path most people are following? The truth is uncomfortable but simple. Most people are not failing because they lack opportunity. They are failing because they are following a script that was never designed to produce wealth, only consumption. These 6 chapters together are not about deprivation, they are about alignment, aligning spending with values, aligning decisions with the future, aligning identity with substance rather than image. When you stop buying new cars, you are not just saving money, you are rejecting depreciation. When you buy less house, you are not settling, you are reclaiming cash flow. When you refuse status symbols, you are not missing out, you are opting out of an expensive illusion. When you eliminate debt, you are not limiting yourself, you are removing a tax on your future. When you stop caring about other people's opinions, you are not isolating yourself, you are freeing your decision-making. And when you think long-term, truly long-term, you stop asking what something costs today and start asking what it costs forever. Each of these choices compounds into the next, reinforcing a lifestyle where money becomes a tool rather than a source of anxiety, where options expand instead of contract, where time begins to work for you instead of against you. Ask yourself one final question. If someone watched your financial choices for a year without hearing your intentions, what story would they assume you were telling about your future? Because intention without behavior is fantasy, and behavior repeated long enough becomes destiny. The people who win financially are rarely the loudest, flashiest, or most admired in the moment. They are the ones quietly making unremarkable choices that add up to remarkable outcomes. Wealth is not loud, it is patient. It is built in silence, protected by indifference to judgment, and sustained by respect for time. When all 6 chapters are understood together, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Becoming wealthy is less about what you start doing and far more about what you permanently stop doing.